Welcome to Peaceful Stoic Habits. I'm so glad you're here because what we're about to talk about today could truly change the way you see yourself and how others see you. Have you ever noticed that the most intelligent people aren't always the ones who speak the loudest or know all the answers? It's actually quite the opposite. The real power of truly intelligent men lies in knowing when to stay silent, when to hold back their thoughts, and when to just listen. Think about it. Sometimes what you don't say says more about you than any clever quote ever could. Over the years, I've studied people, not only through the lens of ancient Stoic wisdom, but also from hours spent in coffee shops watching human nature unfold in real time. And let me tell you, the wisest men I've met share a common trait. They don't waste words. They never rush to fill silence with unnecessary chatter, and they certainly don't say things that undermine their credibility. Today, we're diving into 7 things intelligent men never say. These aren't rules based on perfection. Instead, they are hard-earned lessons learned through trial and error. These phrases may seem innocent or even confident, but they lead nowhere good. Stick with me. Hit that subscribe button and let's get wiser together. I already know that. There's a phrase we all say more often than we like to admit. I already know that. It may sound harmless or even confident, but in reality, it reveals something much less flattering: a closed mind. The truth is, an intelligent man knows better. The moment you convince yourself there's nothing more to learn, you've shut the door on growth. I learned this lesson the hard way years ago. I was working with a mentor, a man whose quiet certainty came from years of experience. We were reviewing a process I had done 100 times before. As he began explaining something to me, I cut him off, saying, "Yeah, I know that already." He gave me a calm but heavy look and moved on. Later that evening, I realized what I had done. Not only had I interrupted him, but I had also robbed myself of the opportunity to learn from his years of wisdom. His experience had taught him things that manuals and training videos simply couldn't teach, and here I was, too proud to listen. When we say, "I already know that," we're really saying, "I have nothing left to learn." But that's not intelligence. It's arrogance wrapped in the illusion of competence. Marcus Aurelius warned us plainly, you cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. Our ego, that need to seem knowledgeable, is often the very thing that blocks our growth. It convinces us that we're standing on solid ground when, in reality, we're balancing on pride. Intelligent men understand that knowledge is not a trophy you win and place on a shelf. It's a river, constantly moving, constantly changing. The water is never the same twice. I once watched a seasoned carpenter patiently listen to an apprentice explain a technique he had mastered decades ago. He nodded, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked the apprentice for sharing his perspective. Later, I asked him why he didn't just tell the kid he already knew it. He smiled and said, "Because sometimes you learn more by listening to the way someone else sees it." That's wisdom, and it's a kind of intelligence that doesn't need to announce itself. So the next time you find yourself thinking, "I've heard this before," take a breath and listen anyway. Not because you need to humor someone, but because you might hear something new, an insight, a subtle shift in perspective, or a nuance that deepens your understanding. And even if you don't, you practice humility, you show respect. And over time, that's what makes you someone worth listening to. In Stoicism, we call this mastery of the self, the ability to set aside pride in favor of clarity, to be a student of life always. In the end, that's the kind of intelligence that outlasts all others. That's impossible. Several years ago, I worked alongside a man named Robert. He was experienced, sharp, and a leader who seemed to carry the weight. of his responsibilities without showing much strain. But there was one phrase he used often, almost like a reflex: "That's impossible." Anytime a new idea surfaced, whether it was a proposal to enter a different market, streamline an outdated system, or even approach a difficult client, he would dismiss it with those two words. At first it sounded practical, even responsible. Who has time to waste chasing pipe dreams, right? But over time, something became painfully clear. Every time he said, "That's impossible," it wasn't the situation he was describing, it was himself. It was his own limits, his own fear. The Stoics understood this kind of thinking well. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And that's exactly what Robert was doing. He wasn't analyzing the situation objectively. He was projecting his own fear of failure onto it. Fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong, fear of trying and coming up short. It's a quiet fear, the kind that doesn't look like fear at all. It wears the mask of logic, caution, and practicality. But underneath, it's the very thing that keeps us small. The belief that if we can't see the entire path, we shouldn't take the first step. Stoic philosophy cuts through this self-imposed paralysis by reminding us that the obstacle isn't the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. I saw this firsthand years later on a project I was part of. The budget was tight, the timeline seemed almost impossible, and the team was inexperienced. Every logical bone in my body told me it couldn't be done. But instead of saying that's impossible, I tried something different. I asked myself, what can I control today? What's the next small step I can take? And you know what? That project turned out to be one of the most successful I've ever worked on. Not because we performed miracles, but because we refused to be paralyzed by the scope of the challenge. We stayed focused on the next step, then the next, and kept moving forward. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That became the difference. When a man says, "That's impossible," he's declaring defeat before the fight even begins. Intelligent men understand that what often feels impossible is just unfamiliar. It's not a wall, it's a challenge to step forward. They know that strength isn't built by winning every battle, but by showing up again and again, especially when the odds seem stacked. That's the essence of Stoic courage, not reckless optimism, but disciplined persistence. In life, we are often asked to do difficult things, and the moment we label them impossible, we close the door on ourselves. But the man who learns to take the next step, no matter how small, opens doors that no one else even sees. That's not just intelligence, that's wisdom forged in effort. "That's not my fault." One of the most damaging sentences a man can utter is, "That's not my fault." It's deceptively simple and often feels justified in the moment, especially when things go wrong, at work, in a relationship, or in life in general. It's natural to want to defend yourself, to make it clear that the blame belongs somewhere else. But here's the truth. Every time we push responsibility away, we hand over our power along with it. Intelligent men understand this deeply. They've learned that responsibility isn't about blame, it's about influence. And if you refuse to take responsibility, even for a small part of the problem, you surrender the chance to be part of the solution. I saw this unfold years ago when a friend of mine, Michael, lost a major client. He was quick to explain why it wasn't his fault. The client was difficult, the market was shifting, his team missed deadlines. All true to a degree. But while he was busy explaining why he wasn't to blame, the opportunity to learn from the experience and improve slipped away. He stayed stuck, repeating the same mistakes, convinced it was always someone else's problem to fix. What he didn't realize was that by refusing to claim any responsibility, he gave up the one thing that could have changed his outcome: control over himself. The Stoics believed we should focus on what is within our control and release the rest. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This is a vital lesson for intelligent men. Accepting responsibility doesn't mean taking the blame. It means taking control of your actions and shaping the outcome. That's not my fault. When we say, "That's not my fault," we're giving away our power to change the situation. We place the responsibility in someone else's hands and wait for them to fix things, to make amends, to do better. But here's the key. When we accept even a small piece of responsibility, we immediately reclaim control. We shift from being passive to active, from powerless to powerful. In my own life, I found that owning my part, no matter how small, opens doors I didn't see before. It might be as simple as admitting I didn't communicate clearly, or that I could have prepared better. Even if others made bigger mistakes, that willingness to take responsibility shifts something inside. It builds trust, both with yourself and with those around you. It shows that you're a man who doesn't wait to be rescued or vindicated. You act. Blame is easy. Responsibility is hard. But responsibility is where true strength lies. The Stoics remind us that we're not here to escape difficulty, but to rise above it. And rising begins with asking, what can I do differently next time? That is how intelligent men lead, not by finding fault, but by finding a way forward. So, I'd love to hear from you. If you found these insights valuable, let me know by commenting yes below. Your thoughts matter, and I'd love to hear what you think. Fonter 4. I don't need any help. One of the most dangerous lies a man can tell himself is, I don't need any help. It sounds noble, doesn't it? Independent, strong. It's a phrase we've been conditioned to admire, especially in a culture that celebrates the lone wolf, the self-made man who forges his own path and carries his burdens without complaint. But let's take a moment to unpack this. The refusal to ask for help is often not a reflection of strength, but of pride. A quiet, corrosive pride that blinds us. It isolates us, making us believe that struggling in silence is a virtue. Over time, it erodes the very resilience we think we're protecting. I was reminded of this lesson when I read about Abraham Lincoln during the darkest days of the Civil War. History often paints Lincoln as a solitary figure, stoic and burdened, carrying the weight of a fractured nation on his shoulders. But what's often overlooked is how deeply he leaned on others. He didn't go through it alone. He surrounded himself with advisors who challenged him. He sought out opinions that contradicted his own, not because he lacked confidence, but because he understood that wisdom doesn't come from isolation. It's shaped through the courage to admit you don't have all the answers. During the brutal conflict at Antietam, Lincoln famously visited General McClellan despite their disagreements, seeking strategic insight. He spent countless hours with his cabinet, often referred to as the team of rivals, because he valued their perspectives, even when they clashed with his own. This wasn't weakness, it was strength measured by humility. And that's the lesson intelligent men learn sooner or later. Self-reliance is important, but it was never meant to be absolute. The Stoics were clear about this. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful man of his time, wrote openly about the debt he owed to his mentors, his teachers, and his friends. In Meditations, he cataloged the lessons he'd learned from each of them, acknowledging how their wisdom shaped his own. The most powerful emperor in the world didn't pretend to have all the answers, so why should we? Yet many of us do. We tell ourselves that asking for help is admitting defeat, that if we reach out, it's because we've failed to be strong enough. But that belief is a trap. It keeps us locked inside our own heads, slowly drowning in problems we were never meant to face alone. And worst of all, it robs the people around us of the chance to offer what they have. When we refuse to ask for help, we deny others the opportunity to give. We cut off the mutual support that binds people together. I've fallen into that trap myself. There was a time when I thought I had to carry it all: work, family, the endless pressures of living up to an image of strength. I thought that keeping it together meant keeping it to myself. All it did was wear me down. The turning point came when I realized that asking for help didn't make me weak. It made me stronger. It opened up the possibility of real growth, and more importantly, it allowed me to be more present for the people who truly mattered. It's a lesson I carry with me every day. As we continue exploring Stoic wisdom, let's dive into how embracing vulnerability and seeking the wisdom of others can enhance our growth. These principles don't just help us navigate the challenges of life, they help us build a stronger, more resilient self. Stay with me as we dive deeper into how to transform these insights into everyday practices. I'm too old for that. One of the most damaging lies a man can tell himself is, "I'm too old for that." It's a phrase that often slips out, quietly, disguised as practicality or even self-deprecating humor. But underneath it is something far heavier, a resignation, a belief that the best chapters of our lives are already written and there's nothing left to pursue. This kind of thinking quietly closes doors long before they need to be closed. Intelligent men understand that this phrase isn't just limiting, it's toxic. It's the slow erosion of purpose, a quiet surrender of the life that's still there, to be lived. I was reminded of this when I read about Harry Bernstein, a man who, at 93 years old, decided to write his first book. Harry had spent most of his life working as a magazine editor and raising a family, but at 93, he felt there was something more to contribute. He wrote The Invisible Wall, a memoir about his childhood in a poor English town divided by religion and prejudice. The book was rejected by several publishers before it was finally released, but when it hit the shelves, he was 96. The success of that book was remarkable. It went on to international acclaim, translated into multiple languages, and touched the lives of people around the world. Harry didn't buy into the lie that he was too old. He didn't convince himself that it was too late. He had something to say, something to create, and he did it. But what struck me most about his story wasn't just the success, it was the courage. The courage to believe that life still had more for him, even in his 90s. He wasn't done growing, learning, or contributing, and that courage isn't exclusive to men like Harry. It's a choice we all face, sometimes daily. Do we listen to the voice that says we've missed our chance, or do we embrace the possibility that as long as we have breath, we still have purpose? The Stoics taught that age means nothing to the soul. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this truth, reflecting that while death is inevitable, our duty is to live as fully and virtuously as we can until it comes. He believed that wisdom often comes with age, not because of the passing years, but because those who remain curious and courageous deepen their understanding over time. Growth doesn't stop with age, it ripens. I've seen men in their 60s learn new trades, start businesses, and mentor young leaders. I've known others who, weighed down by regret and the passage of time, retreated from life. The difference isn't circumstance, it's mindset. A man who says, "I'm too old for that," has already closed the door. But a man who asks, "What can I do now?" opens it wide again. Age doesn't disqualify us from living boldly. It gives us more to offer. Experience, clarity, resilience, these aren't the signs of someone who's finished. They're the tools of someone just getting started. That's the Stoic path, to keep learning, to keep striving, until the very last moment. Because as long as we are here, there is still work to be done. Picking up from where we left off, we've explored the value of acting in the present rather than putting off important decisions and actions. Now let's move into another powerful realization, the way we limit ourselves with the belief that we can't change. I'll do it later. There are few phrases more seductive or destructive than "I'll do it later." It sounds harmless, right? Almost rational, a promise to ourselves that we'll get to it eventually. But the truth is, later becomes the graveyard where most of our best intentions are quietly buried. Wise men understand this truth, and many have learned the hard way that delaying what truly matters doesn't buy you time, it robs you of it. Think about it. Every time we tell ourselves we'll make that phone call tomorrow, apologize next week, or start that important project when things settle down, we're gambling with something we have no control over. Time. I once knew a man named Thomas. By any measure, he was successful. He had a thriving business, a beautiful family, and respect in his community. But there was one thing: he was always too busy. He often told himself that he'd spend more time with his aging father later, when things at the office weren't so hectic. He postponed the fishing trip they had planned, delayed calling to catch up, and pushed back visits just to sit and talk. Then one day, later ran out. His father passed away suddenly, and Thomas was left with a phone full of drafts he never sent and a heart full of things he never said. He shared this with me years later, not for sympathy, but as a warning. We think we have time until we don't. The Stoics were painfully clear about this reality. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily of his own mortality, not to be morbid, but to sharpen his sense of urgency. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This isn't just a philosophical thought experiment. It's a practice, a mindset. Intelligent men adopt this mindset because they know the clock isn't in their hands. Time doesn't wait for us to be ready. It doesn't care about our plans or intentions. What we delay today, we may never get the chance to do tomorrow. That's why wise men act now. They make the phone call they've been putting off. They take the first uncomfortable step toward healing a broken relationship. They start the project that's been sitting in the corner of their mind, gathering dust and doubt. Not because it's easy, but because they understand that waiting for the perfect moment is a dangerous game. And almost always, that game doesn't pay off. I've experienced this myself. There were conversations I postponed because I didn't want to deal with discomfort, letters I didn't write because I thought there'd be time. But when I finally stopped waiting and acted, something powerful happened. The weight lifted. Clarity replaced regret. I realized that action, not intention, is what builds a life worth remembering. The Stoics teach us to live now, fully, and with urgency. Later is an illusion that comforts us until it's too late. The man who acts today, who refuses to leave the important things undone, lives without regret. And that is true wisdom, because opportunity doesn't knock twice. It fades quietly while we're busy waiting for a better time. That's just how I am. One of the most limiting beliefs a man can hold is summed up in the phrase, "That's just how I am." It sounds definitive, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. But what it really signals is a quiet surrender, a decision to stop growing. Intelligent men avoid this mindset because they understand a truth that many ignore. We are not fixed beings, trapped by old habits or past identities. Who we are is shaped by what we choose to do over and over again. The moment a man declares himself incapable of change, he isn't defining his nature, he's refusing responsibility for it. I've seen this play out too many times. A man loses his temper often, and when called out he shrugs and says, "That's just how I am." Another man avoids meaningful connection because he's uncomfortable with vulnerability and tells himself, "That's just who I've always been." These aren't statements of fact, they're excuses. Excuses that allow fear and inertia to masquerade as self-awareness. But deep down, what they reveal is resistance, the resistance to discomfort, to the difficult process of change, and to the reality that no man is ever finished becoming who he's meant to be. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that change is a constant and essential part of life. They didn't view their character as fixed. Rather, they saw it as something that could be shaped and improved through deliberate effort. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoic minds, often reminded himself that it is not our circumstances that define us, but how we choose to respond to them. The greatest obstacle to growth is the belief that we cannot change, that we are stuck in a pattern. Building on our previous point about embracing change and growth, let's now dive into the Stoic perspective on how we are not limited by our nature, but by the stories we tell ourselves, confronting change head-on. The Stoics were not afraid of change. In fact, they taught us that we are not prisoners of our temperament, our past, or our impulses. Epictetus famously said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." In other words, it's not our nature that limits us. It's the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Change is uncomfortable. It demands self-examination and a willingness to let go of the familiar, even when that familiarity has become a source of pain. But the Stoics also believed that self-mastery was the highest calling, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for a life of meaning. Growth requires honesty. It demands that we ask ourselves harder questions. Am I acting this way because it's truly who I am, or because it's easier than doing the work to change? Intelligent men choose the harder path. They recognize that wisdom isn't a trophy you earn and display. It's a practice. It's a commitment to becoming a better version of yourself every day. Not because you hate who you are right now, but because you respect yourself enough to not stay the same. The power of self-mastery. At the end of the day, the phrase, "That's just how I am," is a way of closing the door on possibility. It's a statement of resignation. But the Stoics remind us that life itself is change. Nature is change. To resist change is to deny the very essence of being alive. The man who understands this doesn't fear change. He welcomes it. He sees himself as a work in progress, unfinished but willing. And in that willingness lies true wisdom. If you've ever caught yourself saying one of these 7 things, trust me, you're not alone. I've been there too, more times than I'd like to admit. But here's the good news. Intelligent men aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who recognize their mistakes and choose to do better. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Becoming better, one thoughtful choice at a time. So, which of these resonated with you today? Maybe it's time to leave "That's just how I am" in the past, or to finally retire "I'll do it later" before later becomes never. Whatever it is, this is your invitation to take the next step. Because wisdom isn't about being perfect. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and always moving forward. If today's conversation sparks something in you, pass it on. Share this video with a friend who's walking this same path. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to explore the Stoic way of living and growing together.